Welcome. This is Chapter 6 discussion, the intercultural communication chapter. This is my one of my favorite chapters. So I'm trying to do some kind of user-generated backdrop, which is not working out the greatest. But as you can see, I'm in a kitchen. This is where I spent most of my employment when I was a young dude. When I was in college. Started working in the kitchen when I was 14. Uh, and all through grad school, really, I worked in the kitchen in some capacity. And even during my PhD program, after I had already started teaching, I would go back for the summer where my parents live, and I would pick up some hours at a local pizzeria. So the kitchen is ingrained in my blood. Anybody who's ever worked in the kitchen knows it's its own unique atmosphere and culture. And I guess I start this lecture or this kind of discussion, activity session, whatever you want to call it, um, with this in mind. I want you to really grasp your head around the idea that culture does not have to be just your ethnic culture. Look at this; it's wild. My hands going through the bags here. Okay, it does not just have to be an ethnic culture. It can be your adopted culture, which would be not like a biological adoption or like a child adult adoption type thing. Um, but if anybody is part of like um, a subculture like punk rock music or um, scrapbookers anonymous or whatever, like any kind of culture you can think of, any kind of hobby activity that you happen to partake in has a culture in and of itself. So I use the restaurant example as a kind of introduction into how even our employers become a culture. Academia is a culture in of itself, but it's not as relatable to many of my students as say the kitchen. So I use the kitchen as kind of backdrop, and for today we'll kind of set forth on this journey of understanding the culture through something that we chose, not something that we were born into. I didn't choose to be born into a French Canadian family and a Hungarian family, right? So my mother is Hungarian, my father is French Canadian. I didn't choose that. I didn't choose to be born in Northern New Jersey, or North Jersey, however you want to refer to it, and then subsequently moved to the Midwest and moved to a small town in outside of Detroit, where they make. I think when I first moved there, the local plant made Cadillacs. Now they make the Spark car. I didn't choose these cultures largely. I mean, yes, you do, I guess, get to choose where you move. Um, but these things, are determined by larger forces. Like I currently live in Mount Olive because anything east of Mount Olive is way too expensive for me. That's just it's a fact of life. So sometimes we don't choose where we end up, but these cultures or these environments uh, contribute to our cultural composition. So um, I want to begin with some definitions here. First one is ethnocentrism. Um, I think with current activities, I'm recording this video in July of 2020, um, where ethnocentrism is a large part of the cultural conversation in the United States and across the world. It has been for most of my life, my entire life, actually. We didn't necessarily tackle this concept of ethnocentrism, but it's really been part of my upbringing. When I was a little kid, there was a big cultural conversation led by Al Gore's wife back when I was, because I'm an old dude now. So when I was a little kid, it was the start of the Clinton years, and there was a lot of controversy surrounding parental guidance and explicit lyrics. Okay, in America, we refer to things like this as the culture wars. Okay, um, now we're in drastically different culture wars. So when I was when I was in college, sitting where you guys are, me and my friends always used to, talk about a national conversation on race. We're like, we really need to talk about race in this country. We don't talk about it. It's a taboo subject. And fast forward, okay, to the election of Obama. Then the official conversation on race began. I would say officially, in Philadelphia, I could pinpoint the exact date. Uh, Barack Obama gave a speech about his pastor, Jeremiah Wright, and about race relations in the United States back in 2008. And I would say that that was the first conversation America ever truly had wading into this very heated territory of race and ethnocentrism. And today we're seeing it playing out with, full on, you know, you've always seen these, but, white supremacist groups across the world, nationalist groups across the world. Doesn't just even have to be European nationalism or white nationalism. There's nationalist groups sprouting up in India, nationalist groups sprouting up in various Latin American countries. This is what ethnocentrism is. The idea that my culture is correct, okay, and your culture is less than or inferior to our understanding of the world. So, for example, if you don't recognize classical music as the peak of, civilization and musical theory, you're wrong. Your musical traditions are all wrong, right? The way you dress is all wrong. Past couple of years, we see videos or Instagram posts of an employer or a teacher who challenges, African hairstyles, Afrocentric hairstyles. And this is rooted in ethnocentrism. The idea that there is one, look at my hair, all right? It was a long time before I grew hair like my father. Okay, I always had short hair. I always, tried to keep my hair well. When I get on the phone with my mom, she goes, "You're gonna comb your hair, right?" My father's always had long hair like this. He always just, pushed it back. I always had short hair. Due to, quarantine and COVID-19, not going to get a haircut, my hair has grown. Okay. In a business setting, this might be considered unprofessional. Okay, my facial hair might be considered unprofessional in some circles. Okay, that is ethnocentrism. These are standards that we adopt based on the cultural standards of another culture. Okay, so wearing a collared shirt, for instance, instead of wearing a traditional garb, right? Those would be ethnocentric standards, right? So that depending on where you're from, shapes your view of what is normal and what is right. So that's ethnocentrism. That should serve as the foundation for our understanding of culture. What we view as right and good is culturally specific. What you view as... so my house growing up always smelled spicy or whatever that is. My mother cooked a lot. I remember one of my friends remarking about the smell of the food, and I just, it never occurred to me. Growing up, I remember being packed things, odoriferous sandwiches like meatloaf and egg salad and tuna salad, and I loved them. Okay, to this day, I still love them, right? But it was odoriferous, and it did not jive well with the bologna and Lunchables that my peers would have, and I was always very self-conscious of that. That's an ethnocentric understanding. I was self-conscious of these things that I had, and it was yucky to a little child's sense if all they eat is bologna and cheese on a sandwich every day. Our taste of food, our preferences of food are ethnocentric, okay? So let me, move this forward. Ethnocentrism is the standard. That is normal. Okay? Um, it's important that you recognize that ethnocentrism, being ethnocentric, doesn't make you a bad person, but not recognizing your ethnocentric bias does make you um, maybe not a bad person, but somebody who is not trying hard enough to live in a pluralistic society. If you live in the United States, if you're not indigenous, and your ancestors came here at one time, or your ancestors were brought here forcibly, okay, you live in a pluralistic society. And at one, merely staying here or being here means you've had your family and you have had to function in a pluralistic society. Pluralism is the heart of our democracy. It's the idea that many voices come together to create this democracy. It is a heterogeneous society. Okay, it's a society made up of many cultures and many individuals. Um, so it is in our best interest, if we want to stay in America and not, go back to where you came from, kind of sentiment. If you do want to participate in the society, it would be in your best interest to learn to challenge your ethnocentric assumptions. None of us are free of ethnocentric bias. We all think something about our culture is is superior to another culture. You see on the on the internet. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this thing called the internet, but there's a long-standing joke about white people's love of mayonnaise. Okay, I like mayonnaise, all right, but there's an idea that somehow if your food contains mayonnaise, it is disgusting or things of that nature. Okay, so that is a ethnocentric assumption that my tastes and my preferences are the standard by which I judge other people's tastes and preferences. It doesn't make you a bad person, again, right? But recognizing that these things are inherent to all of us and we need to work on them from limiting us, right? From making us judge people limiting us from really fully embracing um, our neighbors and our community. A lot of you are coming to college from heterogeneous or from homogenous communities. Um, your high schools were probably largely made up of people who look like you. Um, and coming to an environment where you have international students, you have students from the country, students from the suburbs, students from the inner city. This is all, okay, this is all a heterogeneous community. Um, Now, CCM is probably a little bit more homogenous than your big 4-year schools, because we're not really attracting the international student body. But challenging your ethnocentric bias will make you a better student overall, and ultimately that will lead to you becoming a better citizen in your community. So that was a really long spiel to kind of set this off, but this is a conversation. This conversation about ethnocentrism has been going on for my entire adult life, and it's now with Black Lives Matter protests across the country has become a central part of our national conversation, and it's important that we begin talking about this using some concepts that were developed to help us understand this. So, what I would like you to do is, after I explain this, I want you to pause the video. So this is a cultural suitcase exercise. My professor, Dr. P at Wayne State University in Detroit, when I was a grad student, a master's student, she had this exercise called the cultural suitcase. and hers was a little bit longer. So she would ask us all to bring in a bag and pull things out of the bag and give a presentation about the things that we have in our cultural suitcase. And one of the things that, has stuck with me is she gave an example of one of her former students came into class with a loaf of white bread and slapped it down on the desk and said, "I have no culture. Okay, I'm just a white guy." And that was his understanding. And she basically said, "You have to go back and redo this project because you're not quite understanding what culture is, right?" You know, over the past decade or so, since I started studying things like race and started reading a little bit more up on these issues, um, my let me see if this, no, the light doesn't turn on. I felt bad for my friends who only really could identify themselves as white, because there's this understanding that there are people with ethnicity and there are people who are exotic and have ethnicity, okay? And then there are just white people. And that's kind of a dangerous thing, because it kind of says that there is nothing culturally that holds these communities together. And I don't know that that's the case. I see things like the Mount Olive, community forum, and people going, "Oh, hell yeah, man, light off a firework. Let's have a little 4th of July festivities, man, woo!" Okay? I see stuff like that. And to me, that screams culture. That's culture, right? My wife comes from a culture where, grilling hot dogs and hamburgers is not part of her culture. And when we first moved in together, our first 4th of July together, we were just having something very, very normal. And I was outside smelling all the hot dogs and hamburgers cooking. I said, "Oh man, I miss this so much." That's culture. And I've referenced food a lot here. Food is a very cultural thing. It's one of the most visible signs of culture. But the point being is that even if you don't recognize it as culture as such, it is likely culture. Okay, you might not recognize a wedding that you've gone to as culturally distinct, but if you've ever been to a wedding from a different culture, you understand that the things that you do at your weddings are so much different than the things that they do at their weddings. Okay, specifically, I remember going to an Armenian wedding, and there was this dance where everybody links pinkies and they dance around in the circle. I thought, oh, how cool this is. Okay, everybody has culture, so I don't want you to just say, "I don't have culture." So the cultural suitcase exercise, what I would like you to do is pause the video and present 2 items that represent you. So my example of 2 items that represent me is my digital recorder. I spent 11 years working in, I had a radio show where I would interview musicians. And one of my favorite types of interviews was like the run and gun style, interview on the fly. So I would do an interview with somebody at a music festival, and then I would upload it to the computer, and then I would, edit it up and play it on the air. That signifies my love of found sound, okay, my love of conversation, and radio culture or audio, time-based audio culture, really music and sound, and the culture of independent music is signified by this digital recorder. And that's what I'm looking for, is you to pick an object and to explain what it means to you and how this signifies your culture. The second thing I would use is a tin of paprika. Now I don't buy tins of paprika anymore. I buy it doesn't taste very good. It's all dry and stale. I'll buy it from a nice fancy spice shop and keep it in the fridge in a nice glass jar or whatever. But that signifies my ethnic culture. I love cooking, but I also I'm Hungarian, so paprika is very important. I can taste bad paprika. It's something that my mom was very particular about, is using good, not old paprika. A lot of you guys, if you go into your spice cabinets, if you smell the paprika, it's probably bad already. It's probably not good. It's not supposed to last for 7 years, okay? But that little tin of paprika signifies my love of food. It signifies my ethnic culture. It's a double kind of artifact there. So I want you to pause the video, and I want you to write down these two things, and that's your first entry for the discussion board. Okay, 3, 2, 1. So, part two, I wanna talk briefly about a couple concepts here. I want to maybe problematize some of the things that we see in the book. So, namely, I'll start off with high context, low context culture. There's this idea that some cultures are high context, okay, and some cultures are low context. So, what do I mean by that? Low context is the culture that you're in right now in academia. Everything's got to be spelled out for you, okay? There's not a lot of context. Your syllabus is a low context document. If I forget to put one little thing on that document, oh, you're gonna let me know, right? You're gonna let me know that you're. Let me get some light here first off, because I didn't anticipate it to get so dark this afternoon. Okay, how's that? Is that better? Get some little light going on here. Okay. Low context is a document. Everything must be spelled out. Everything must be stated. Okay. A lot of relationships you have are low context. Okay. So there's a lot of people who get into like romantic relationships. Everything needs spelled out. So I don't know if she likes me. Look at the text message she sent me. It's very, very vague. Like I feel like some in myself when I was younger needed things to be so low context. We needed everything spelled out. There was nothing mysterious about it, that you couldn't take anything, any of the hints or the messages. And sometimes that's a lot of what relationships are, is trying to send hints to people, right? That's a high context kind of thing, right? Sending somebody a hint. Low context is where you have to explain yourself, and it's like, it sounds like overly explaining in some instances, right? So an example of high context is when your mom goes, "Rob," she's saying, "You know what you did. You're in trouble. Get over here, okay? Let's talk about it." That's high context, when you don't need to say very much to convey your message. The book says that some cultures are high context, some cultures are low context. Maybe little overly simplistic, though. Okay, not all cultures are so neatly defined. There are different institutions: the institution of family, the institution of work, the institution of school. All have different kinds of rules surrounding this stuff. You know, I have friends who come from other countries. When I tell them what I do and how I have to provide like these extensive guidelines for every single project for my students, think it's ridiculous, right? They think that it shouldn't have to be spelled out because there's a certain set of standards that teachers in other countries just come to expect of their students. I have assignments in my business communication course where I will provide very high context instructions for students to see how they deal with ambiguity. This class is not one of those, but I will ask students, just send me a resume. And some students, that it causes them such grief, okay, because they're so used to, in a setting like their college classroom, that their professor will provide instructions step by step of what they're expecting from the assignment. So it causes grief for some students when that environment is very high context. Not every culture, okay, abides by these en masse. So that's my first issue that I have with the way the book explains high context and low context. But you understand, by and large, what high context, low context means. Now I want to move on to this really nasty notion of individualistic and collectivistic culture. You might be more familiar with this actually now, because it seems to be becoming part of the popular understanding of America that we are just an individualistic society. That is not at all true. If you look at the way your book presents certain cultures, it will say things like East Asian cultures are collectivistic, and you know, America is individualistic. I would, I wildly disagree with that. Very, very, um, very totalizing kind of way of explaining a group of individuals who are all individuals, by the way, who have very different ideas about what happens in the world. So I had, when I was at Rensselaer Polytechnic, I had a group of East Asian students, and I was presenting this, and I asked them about individualism and collectivism, and one of the students raised their hands, and it says, "This book says that we're collectivistic," and I would disagree with that. And I said, "That's brilliant. Explain to me why." And he explained to me why he's going to school. He explained to me what his parents expect of him, what he expects of himself, why he's in the program that he's in, but really what his passions are, and about how he plans on pursuing his individual passions. And I just thought, how brilliant is this, right? This wonderful, candid conversation, because I often had a hard time buying this idea that somehow, you know, the entirety of this culture can be explained a little bit better by understanding that Americans are just selfish and individualistic. And I don't buy that. I really don't buy that. We just came out of a moment where we've collectively had to challenge ourselves to stay home. We've had to challenge ourselves to do things that we've never thought of doing before. Collectively, we're wearing masks for the collective, for one another. So I would really disagree with the notion that America is just individualistic. Maybe some of us feel so individualistic that we can't do things for one another. Okay, when I see my neighbor has their trash can out and the lid is open, collecting full of rain, I'll close the lid because I know I would want somebody to do the same for me. Okay, that's not individualistic thinking, and I think many people would do the same, right? So I would disagree with these binaries that are established here: high context, low context, individualistic, collectivistic. So that's a little kind of caveat here to the book. Now I want to briefly talk about, before we'll have a closing activity, but I want to briefly talk about conflict. So one of the things that I'm interested in doing is sort of conflict resolution. I work for an organization. I volunteer for an organization called CELIA, and CELIA deals with cross-cultural communication, but specifically with the conflicts that arise between the West and the predominantly Muslim world. So one of the things that I would like to maybe delve into and share a little background on it is how I view culture in this how I view conflict in this cross-cultural setting. Conflict is caused. Conflict theorists say that conflict is caused by three things. It's caused by power, okay, or a desire for power, a desire for wealth, okay. So you have power, you have wealth, and prestige. So prestige being I want to be, Instagram famous, or whatever, whatever is the current place to become famous at. Those are the three things that derive conflict. So there's conflict over wealth, or it could be resources, right? Control of land that has, minerals, rich minerals in there. It can be over power. It can be over the desire to dominate a group of people, and it can be over prestige, or a desire for fame. And these things overlap, and they're very intricate. And if you really use these as a, hey Maya, be careful. Hey, be careful, Maya. No. Where are you going? Shh. I'm in the middle of a. Okay, sorry. My daughter was running up the stairs, and it scares me because she's still a little child. So if you, I forget where I'm at. If you look at any cultural conflict, cross-cultural conflict, at its core, it's probably not about, what we're told it's about. So we're told that it's about, um, two religions fighting each other since the dawn of time. In the case of, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, what you're seeing is there is a jockeying for power to control land or resources or wealth there, right? To control ancient sites, to control certain places where mosques have been presented, sacred holy lands, and things of that nature. The root or the undercurrent of these conflicts is not just culture. There's something larger there. There's something about wealth. There's something about power, right? So understanding conflict, I think, is really useful to understanding intercultural struggles and the struggles that we have. Is the struggle between Black America and White America a cultural one, or is it over resources? Resources being, the amount of money that is spent on schooling, the amount of money that is spent on, cultural enrichment. Is it over power, right? The power to, see representations of yourself in the media, right? The power to make laws, the power to, determine, how things are done in society. Is it over prestige, right? Is it over who becomes, famous in a society, right? So that's really where, this stuff is, broken down into conflict and how conflict undergirds this. So the last thing that I would like you to do after the videos is played out, I want you to free write for 10 minutes, okay? I don't care, how you do it. Just set a timer and free write. I want you to write what it means to be from your culture, and you could pick any culture. So, I'm using this, this understanding of working in the kitchen. I could say this is what it means to work in a kitchen, and I would also like to add, maybe you want to add your ethnic culture, or maybe your religious culture, right? Or maybe none of the above. Maybe you want to talk about what it means to be a punk rocker or a heavy metal fan, or what it means to go to open mics at coffee houses every Friday night. Write for 10 minutes about what it means to be part of your culture. I would like you to take a stab at incorporating some of the concepts from Chapter 6 that you should have read for this week. So go ahead and do that. Thank you for listening. Again, I want you to write for 10 minutes and post it in the discussion board. So the two things you will post from this video, that suitcase exercise and the free write on your culture. So thank you very much.